The place that should have been empty. The woods were never truly silent. Even at nearly 3 in the morning, there was always something moving, branches rubbing together, insects buzzing in uneven rhythms, distant animal calls that sounded closer than they should have been. The deeper I went, the more the darkness seemed to press in, swallowing the narrow beam of my flashlight like it didn't belong there. I stopped walking and listened. My boots rested on a barely visible dirt path, overgrown and almost reclaimed by weeds. Somewhere ahead, hidden behind layers of trees, was the property I'd come to explore. An abandoned farmstead I'd visited once before during the day. Back then, it felt eerie but manageable. Just another forgotten place slowly being eaten by time. At night, it felt different. Yeah, this already feels like a bad idea, I muttered to myself, adjusting the camera strap to my chest. The red recording light blinked on. I hadn't planned to come out here this late. Sleep wouldn't come, my mind racing with the usual mix of restlessness and curiosity. I'd told myself I'd just drive out, maybe sit in the car, maybe film a short intro. But once you're already in the woods at 3 in the morning, turning back feels harder than going forward. That's how these places get you. I pushed on. The trees thinned, and the shape of the first structure emerged from the darkness. An old chicken coop, half collapsed, its wire mesh rusted and torn open like something had clawed its way out. Burned trash lay scattered nearby, blackened and half buried in the dirt. Someone had been here recently. That thought settled in my chest like a weight. I scanned the area slowly, flashlight cutting across the ground, the trees, the shadows between them. Nothing moved. No footsteps. No voices. Just the hum of insects and my own breathing, suddenly louder than it should have been. Then I saw it. A jacket. It hung from a nail on the side of a rotting shed, swaying slightly as it swung gently in the wind, though there was no breeze. My pulse quickened. Someone had to have been here recently, maybe hours ago, maybe days. But the dampness of the fabric suggested it wasn't long abandoned. I stepped closer, every creak of the rotten wood beneath my boots echoing in the silent night. Beside the jacket was an old printer, frozen in time. Dust covered it, but the corners of the machine gleamed faintly under the beam of my flashlight, as if it had been left there deliberately, as a warning or an invitation. This is weird, I whispered. I moved past the chicken coops, ducking under low-hanging branches. The main house came into view, though in fragments, the roof sagging, the siding ripped off in jagged strips, brick columns standing stubbornly among the rubble. The place looked ready to collapse under its own history. I shouldn't go in. I knew that. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back. And yet, curiosity is a cruel master. I stepped inside the skeletal remains of a barn nearby. It was dangerous, the wooden beams groaning under my weight, the roof barely holding itself up. But there was something in the dim glow that drew me forward. Preserved cans of oil lined a shelf, the labels faded but legible, 1940s, maybe earlier. I ran my fingers over them, feeling the rust and the decades of neglect. It was as if time had stopped here. Then I saw it. A truck. A 1953 model, classic lines still intact despite the dust and decay. My heart jumped. I'd seen this truck in old photographs from the previous owner of the farm, a relic I'd thought lost forever. Here it was, standing quietly, waiting to be discovered. I crouched beside it, running my hand along the hood. You're real, I breathed. A grin spread over my face despite the tension in my chest. I had to document this. This wasn't just exploration anymore, it was a personal milestone. I lingered, taking careful shots with my camera, knowing that this find alone could make the trip worth it. Yet as I backed out of the barn, the forest seemed to close in. The silence had grown heavier. Something had shifted. I kept moving, stepping over debris and tangled roots. The old barn gave way to the main house. Windows were shattered, doors missing, and the interior was nothing more than a shell of walls and memories. I spotted old furniture, surprisingly well-preserved. A chair still sat upright, a dresser lying on its side, drawers gaping open. I paused, flashlight trembling slightly in my hand. Whoever had left, or whatever had left this place, did so suddenly. The rooms felt frozen midlife, a snapshot of abandonment that made my stomach twist. Footsteps? I froze. Nothing. I moved forward anyway, camera rolling, eyes scanning every shadow. The upstairs floor groaned beneath me. Dust floated in the beam of the flashlight, caught like tiny ghosts in the air. Old picture frames leaned against walls, faces staring from decades past. One of them, an old Disney print from the 70s, caught my eye. The colors were still vibrant, and it looked almost cheerful in the otherwise decayed environment. I pressed on toward what had once been the office space. The ceiling hung low, insulation dangling like cobwebs. An old RC can rested on the desk, next to a small man and woman statue. I stepped carefully, not wanting to disturb anything, yet the air was thick with unease. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the broken windows. The house seemed to breathe, shifting slightly, creaking under the weight of unseen years. I made my way to the greenhouse at the back. Once a prized possession, now a skeletal frame with hanging pots, swaying in the night air. The structure was from the University of Tennessee originally, moved decades ago, but now it was only a whisper of its former life. An old mattress sagged in the corner, tables collapsed around it, everything coated in dust and the damp smell of abandonment. I moved among the pots, some still clinging to brittle plants. The care once given here was still evident. Someone had loved this place. I shivered, stepping back into the darkness beyond the greenhouse. The forest loomed. Somewhere, distant dogs barked, echoing through the trees, startlingly loud in the night. I could feel eyes on me, though I couldn't see anyone. This was the tension of exploration, the mix of beauty, history, and unease. Nothing supernatural had appeared yet, but the weight of being watched was real. I backed away slowly, glancing at the glowing outline of the farmhouse, the barns, and the skeletal greenhouse. The 3 a.m. challenge had become something more. It wasn't just about abandoned buildings anymore. It was about the stories left behind, the lives abruptly paused, the mysteries of what had once been a thriving place, now swallowed by the night. And somewhere in the shadows of the trees, I knew I wasn't entirely alone. Shadows in the silence. The night air had grown colder, a thin mist curling along the ground, dampening the crunch of leaves beneath my boots. Every step through the abandoned farmstead felt heavier than the last, as though the forest itself was pressing in, observing my movements. The excitement of discovering the truck and the greenhouse now felt distant, replaced by a gnawing unease. I reached the edge of the property, where the trees grew thick and dark. The last remnants of the barn loomed behind me, the skeletal roof barely holding together. The silence was almost absolute, broken only by the distant echo of a dog barking. Though I was certain there were no dogs within a mile of this place. My flashlight beam cut through the fog, illuminating twisted metal, broken wood, and the occasional glint of something reflective, a forgotten tool, a broken bottle, or perhaps the eyes of something else. I paused near a collapsed fence, trying to steady my breathing. A shadow flickered at the edge of my vision. I spun, flashlight slicing through the darkness, but there was nothing there. Just the wind? Perhaps. But a chill ran down my spine as a faint scraping sound came from the main house. Slow, deliberate, impossible to ignore. Hello. My voice cracked slightly. Is someone there? No answer. Only the sound of my own heartbeat and the groan of old wood in the night. I approached the house cautiously, boots crunching on the debris-strewn path. Each step seemed louder than the last. The windows stared back at me like dark, empty eyes. I hesitated at the doorframe, noting the jagged shards of glass reflecting my flashlight beam. The interior was more ruined than before, debris scattered everywhere, dust thick enough to leave prints in the air. Then I heard it again, a faint whisper. I froze, every nerve on edge. It wasn't a word I could understand, more a hiss, a breath carried just beyond comprehension. My stomach tightened. This wasn't the thrill of exploration anymore. This was something else. Something personal. I edged inside. The floorboards groaned under my weight, echoing through the hollow shell of the house. I moved toward the staircase, where shadows pooled beneath the broken steps. The sound came again, closer this time, a soft tap like nails on wood. I turned sharply, flashlight sweeping across the room, revealing nothing but overturned furniture and dust-coated memories. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice steadier than I felt. A figure darted in the corner of my vision. Just a flash of movement before it vanished behind a doorway. My pulse raced. Someone or something was definitely here. I moved toward the back of the house, where an old kitchen once stood. Drawers were open, utensils scattered. A sink half full of stagnant water reflected my flashlight beam. On the counter, a plate with a faint crust of old food suggested a life paused abruptly. Then it clicked. This place wasn't just abandoned. Someone had left in a hurry, or had been forced to. A soft creak came from above, the second floor. My eyes locked on the stairs. I could see a shadow moving across the upper hallway, barely visible, but unmistakable. I swallowed hard, flashlight trembling slightly. "Show yourself," I shouted, stepping closer. Silence. Then, from the darkness above, a slow, deliberate scraping sound began again. This time, it moved down the stairs. Something or someone was descending toward me. I backed away, tripping over debris. My flashlight flickered, and for a terrifying second, the room was swallowed in darkness. When the beam steadied, the shadow had vanished. But the feeling remained, something watching, waiting, calculating. I knew I had to get out, to escape into the night before curiosity became danger. My feet carried me across the threshold, back into the cold mist outside. I paused, listening. The house was silent again, but I could swear I heard faint breathing, just beneath the wind, just beyond the trees. I turned to leave the property entirely. Yet, as I passed the greenhouse, I noticed something strange. One of the hanging pots swung gently, though there was no breeze. And in the faint light, a figure stood at the edge of the forest, just out of reach, watching. I didn't wait. I ran. Every step echoed across the abandoned land, heart pounding in my chest. The familiar sights, the truck, the barns, the crumbling house, blurred past me in the mist. But in the corner of my mind, I knew this wasn't over. Something had been in that house. Something had followed me. The forest closed behind me like a trap. I didn't look back until I reached my car, the distant sound of a branch snapping echoing through the fog. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys, adrenaline burning every nerve. Once inside, I locked the doors and started the engine, the headlights cutting through the mist. The farm vanished behind me, swallowed by darkness. But the unease lingered, a constant reminder that some discoveries aren't just about forgotten histories, they're about what's still alive in the shadows. And something had definitely survived the night. The road back to my car was longer than I remembered, every shadow in the fog seeming alive, every snapping twig a warning. My heartbeat drummed in my ears as the mist thickened, wrapping around the trunks of the trees like ghostly fingers. I kept glancing behind me, convinced I would see the figure again, but the forest remained still, deceptively calm. Once inside the car, I gripped the wheel, my breath misting in the cold air. I tried to rationalize what I had seen, a trick of the light, a stray animal, anything. But the movement, deliberate and measured, had not been natural. And the swinging pot in the greenhouse? There was no wind. I turned the key, and the engine roared to life, breaking the oppressive silence. The headlights cut through the mist, illuminating the twisted remnants of fences and fallen trees as I drove slowly down the narrow path. Then I noticed something at the edge of the road. A shadow detached itself from the tree line. It moved with purpose. I slammed my foot on the gas, heart racing. The shadow followed briefly, melting into the darkness, and then it was gone. But the unease didn't fade. Every corner I passed felt like a potential trap, every curve in the road hiding the unknown. My mind replayed the events in the house, over and over. The whisper, the scraping, the shadow on the stairs. each detail pressed against me like a warning I could not ignore. How long had this presence been here? How many had it waited for? I reached the main road and turned toward the highway, hoping the isolation would end. But even as I drove away, the feeling of being watched lingered. Every glance in the rear-view mirror suggested movement in the foggy tree lane, though each time there was nothing. By the time I reached my apartment, the adrenaline had dulled into a deep, hollow dread. I locked every door and window, yet sleep eluded me. Every creak of the old building, every gust of wind against the glass, set my nerves on edge. I kept imagining the figure watching from the edge of the trees, waiting for the next night, the next mistake. The next morning, I returned to the site, but not to explore. I needed to confirm what I had seen, and maybe to reassure myself that it was only imagination. The farmstead was bathed in daylight now, the mist gone, the shadows retreating. Everything seemed harmless, almost mundane. The collapsed barns, rusted tools, overgrown paths. But then I saw it. Footprints in the damp soil. Not animal tracks, human. They led from the tree line toward the house, stopping at the doorway where I had heard the scraping. A shiver ran down my spine. Whoever or whatever had been there was not gone. I took photos, documented the tracks, and left quickly. But in the back of my mind, I knew the forest was hiding something. The fog, the darkness, the house. It was a trap for the unwary. And now I had proof that I hadn't imagined it. That night, I barely slept, checking the window every hour. The thought of returning to the farm was terrifying, yet I knew I had to. Something about the place had drawn me in. The abandoned buildings, not the history, but the lingering presence that refused to be ignored. And deep down, I knew the figure was still out there, watching, patient, waiting for the next nightfall to reclaim its territory. The night air was sharper than ever as I approached the farmstead again, the moon obscured by ragged clouds that cast the world in fleeting shadows. Every step I took on the overgrown path seemed amplified in the silence, each crunch of dead leaves sounding like a scream. The house loomed ahead, skeletal and hollow, its windows like dark, empty eyes staring back at me. I hesitated at the doorway, flashlight in hand, and took a deep breath. The footprints from the previous day were still faintly visible in the dirt, leading straight to the house. My pulse thundered in my ears, but something compelled me forward. Curiosity, maybe obsession, or the unshakable need to know the truth about the presence that haunted this place. Inside, the air was thick, almost tangible. Dust motes floated in the beam of my flashlight like tiny specters, disturbed only by my movement. I crept along the hallway, every step careful, every sound deliberate. The scraping from the floorboards seemed closer tonight, echoing in the vast emptiness. Then I saw it, a shadow darting across the far wall. My heart skipped, and I froze, barely daring to breathe. The figure moved deliberately, almost testing me, vanishing and reappearing in ways that made no logical sense. My rational mind fought to dismiss it, but the primal part of me knew the truth. I was not alone. I followed the figure cautiously toward the greenhouse, where the hanging pots swayed despite the lack of wind. There, in the center of the room, I caught my first full glimpse. A man, or something wearing the semblance of a man, stood partially shrouded in shadow, unmoving, yet radiating a sense of menace. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice trembling despite my efforts to sound steady. No answer, only the whisper of my own breathing, mingling with the faint creak of the structure. Then, suddenly, a low, deliberate laugh echoed through the greenhouse. The sound was human, yet wrong, like the sound of rusted hinges grinding together, warped and unnatural. Panic surged. My flashlight flickered, casting the figure into a terrifying blur of movement and shadow. It stepped closer, slow, deliberate, each motion heavy with intent. I wanted to run, to escape, but my feet were rooted in fear. Then came a sound from behind, a door slamming shut somewhere deeper in the house. The figure paused, listening. I took the opportunity to retreat, moving backward, flashlight sweeping across walls lined with relics of the past, rusted tools, broken furniture, and photographs yellowed with age. Every object seemed to whisper secrets, hinting at lives interrupted, histories abandoned. I stumbled into the barn, and there it was again. The jacket I had seen weeks ago, swaying gently as if someone had just removed it. My stomach turned. I realized then that the presence was more than a memory, more than a shadow. It was tethered to this place, guarding its secrets with vigilance I could barely comprehend. The chase continued through the crumbling farmstead, each building more perilous than the last. I felt its gaze on me constantly, and the night seemed to close in. My flashlight illuminated fragments of a forgotten world, overturned cars, burned-out appliances, and the remains of what had once been a home. Finally, I reached the top of the silo, the highest point on the property. From there, I could see the expanse of the abandoned land, a haunting panorama of decay. The figure did not follow, but I could feel its presence still, coiled and patient, like a predator watching from below. I realized then that some mysteries were not meant to be solved, some presences not meant to be confronted. The farmstead held its secrets close, and I had trespassed far enough. My only choice was to retreat, and hope that the night had not claimed me as part of its story. With one last glance at the shadowy property, I turned and ran, the cold wind cutting across my face. Behind me, the darkness seemed to sigh, almost satisfied, as if it had been waiting for me to leave. And though I escaped physically unscathed, the memory of that night, of the figure that stalked silently through the ruins, would never leave me. The barn creaked under my weight as I pushed the door open, revealing a tangle of shadows cast by my flashlight. Broken hay bales littered the floor, and old farm tools hung from rusted nails, casting grotesque silhouettes. My breathing came in shallow, fast bursts, and every sound seemed magnified. The drip of water from a leaky roof, the scuttle of some unseen animal. Then I saw it, more than just a shadow this time. A figure crouched near the far corner, partially hidden behind an overturned workbench. Its face was obscured, but the glint of eyes reflecting my light made my stomach knot. It did not move, yet its presence was unmistakable. A low, rasping sound echoed from it, more of a growl than a voice. I stepped back, and my flashlight caught something on the floor, a collection of old photographs scattered as if dropped in haste. Faces stared up at me, families who had lived, children who had played, and men who had worked the fields. It was as if the figure had been watching over these memories, guarding them, unwilling to let the past be disturbed. I backed out of the barn slowly, heart hammering, and the figure followed, not with steps, but with a looming movement that seemed impossible to measure. Every time I stopped, it paused. Every time I moved, it mirrored my motion, always just a few feet away, hidden but omnipresent. The greenhouse was next, the eerie skeletal frame reaching skyward like a cage. Pots hung askew, and vines crawled along the cracked glass panes. Here, I saw remnants of care, labels on pots, dried soil still clinging to old seeds, a ghost of a gardener's hand. And then, a sound, a whisper of movement, made me freeze. Something brushed against the glass, leaving streaks in the moonlight. I shined the flashlight into the shadows, and there it was, the figure, crouched near the back, holding something. A small, rusted key. My mind raced. Why a key? What door did it unlock? And why did the figure follow me so relentlessly, yet never speak? Panic surged. I turned to leave, but the doorway was blocked. The figure stepped closer, slow, deliberate. My instincts screamed to run, but there was no clear escape. The air grew colder, my breath fogging in front of me, and I realized the place itself seemed alive, pressing in from all sides. Then, unexpectedly, it stopped. The figure stood still, and a sound emerged, a whisper almost human, almost a warning. Leave now. The command sent shivers down my spine, and I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted, stumbling over debris, crashing out into the moonlit yard. Outside, the silence of the night enveloped me. The figure did not follow beyond the greenhouse. It remained tethered to its domain. My flashlight shook in my hand as I glanced back at the farmstead, its structures looming like silent sentinels. The shadow of the figure lingered in my mind, impossible to forget. I ran through the woods, branches whipping at my face, until the distant hum of the road met my ears. Only when I was safely back in my car did I allow myself to breathe fully. But even then, the images, the crouching figure, the scattered photographs, the rusted key, haunted me. I never returned to that farm. Yet the memory stayed. The figure, whatever it was, had left an indelible mark, a reminder that some places are not abandoned. They are claimed. And some mysteries, no matter how human they may seem, are meant to remain untouched. As I drove away, the wind in my hair, I realized the farmstead was more than a collection of ruins. It was a story paused in time, watched over by a presence that ensured its history would never be forgotten. And sometimes, the most terrifying thing is not what you find in the dark, but who, or what, is watching from the shadows, waiting for you to leave.